This is a download from the BBC. To find out more and for our terms of use, please go to bbc.co.uk. Hello. Wait a minute. Who's that over there?
Bono, you're live in the Today programme. Bono!
Alan Partridge lives. The perils of broadcasting live from the red carpet.
It sounded to me as if he was a teenager chasing his latest idol.
Bono! Oh,
he's gone, has he?
Alan, otherwise known as Colin Patterson, gives us the lowdown on his Partridge moment.
Come on, within two cries of Bono, I was trying to take the listeners with them. I was acknowledging this was not a normal moment for Radio 4.
You could say that again. Also, we squeeze inside the Broadcasting House inbox and do our own internal audit of emails sent to Barry O'Connell and his programme team.
People are battering the door down to tell us not what we're like or if the programme's any good, but about what the country's like.
And we try to unravel another mystery. Why did Tuesday's edition of Yesterday in Parliament go missing? But first, the annual orgy of hyperbolic sycophancy that is the Oscars. Every year, TV viewers are treated to a galaxy of Hollywood stars posing and pouting on the red carpet in an attempt to make it onto the front pages and into the top tweets. And we love it, particularly when the Brits are in conquering mood.
12 years a slave. Brad Pitt, Dee Gardner, Jeremy Clarkson.
The scheduling is a bit of a problem, though, since by the time the awards are finally handed out in the Hollywood night, most of us are fast asleep. So perhaps it's understandable that Radio 4's flagship Today programme wanted to wake us up on Monday morning with the results, delivered live from one of the most prestigious post-Oscar parties. But many of our listeners were not impressed by the coverage, and they were certainly not pro bono.
My name is Charlie Stevenson. I'm from East Sussex. While there was nothing wrong with having an item in the programme about the Oscars, especially since this year held significant British interest, perhaps it wasn't a good idea having a live link to the red carpet at a post-event party with entertainment reporter Colin Patterson.
I'm at the red carpet at the Vanity Fair party at the moment, and Bono is walking past.
Colin was clearly caught up in the thrill of the moment, and we were then subject to the unedifying sound of Colin's desperately shouted pleas to Bono to come and talk live on the radio to John Humphreys.
Bono, you're live in the Today programme. Come over and speak to John Humphreys.
No, you're not speaking to John.
It's Jim Naughty, sorry.
Hello, my name is Philip Manvell. I'm a regular listener to Radio 4, and particularly the Today programme. It sounded to me as if he was a teenager chasing his latest idol.
Bono! Oh,
he's gone, is he?
I'm feeling this is undignified for Radio 4.
Former guest editor of this programme, you know. Anyway, Colin...
And then a short while later, there's Bono again. It's BBC, and he got Bono there.
I think we've got Bono coming back.
Oh, is he? Is he coming?
He is coming over.
What Bono had to say didn't seem at all of any interest. It was bland, very anodyne, and not the sort of thing that we would expect on the Today programme.
We had a great time. We're here. We're tourists. You know what I mean? It's Hollywood. It's Hollyweird. It's great fun.
Hello, my name's Steve Collins. I'm from Chichester. Now, I'm not particularly interested in what Bono has to say at the best of times, but when Mr. Patterson did finally speak to the Irish singer, it wasn't really worth listening to.
I don't want to talk about what Nelson Mandela meant to me, or you'd be here all night, all morning, and the next day. It's great to sing a song for him.
I don't blame Bono for this. Just I don't think that the BBC should display such creepiness towards him. It was like everything he says must be so profound, but it really was nonsensical as far as I was concerned.
The Oscars. I almost feel I brought shame in the Today programme.
You haven't... No, your rugby tackle on Bono was much appreciated.
You're okay about it. You're okay about it, are you?
So what was going on? Who better to ask than the man himself, Colin Patterson?
So at about 6:43, I got a buzzing in my headphones saying that Today programme would like you. We'd just done a hit on 5 Live, so it would actually work. Now, this was the first I had heard of it. There had been no requests beforehand. They passed the lines over, and within 1 minute, I was on air. Hadn't even been told who was presenting the programme.
Right, so you didn't know whether it was John Humphreys or Jim Naughty?
No, I didn't. And there was a lot of shouting going on when they came to me.
Well, we've listened to a clip and it's obviously pretty embarrassing stuff. Did you realise, as Bono refused to respond to your request, that this would be perhaps one of the more memorable moments of your broadcasting career?
Well, you use the word embarrassing. I might use the word entertaining. I think part of the reason that Radio 4 wanted to come to me was to get the atmosphere of the Oscars. If they just wanted to have the list of winners, they could have had someone in London doing it in the studio. I was speaking to James as Bono walked by. Now, Bono is someone who was Oscar nominated that night. He had performed at the Oscars that night. He's a Radio 4 name. He has guest edited the Today programme in the past, so a very relevant person to speak to. I shouted Bono twice. At that point, I wanted to take the listeners along with me. I knew it was not the normal behaviour for Radio 4.
Well, it
Radio
wasn't.
4 do not cover.
Kathleen O'Neill says of your Bono moment that it was sycophantic excitement. Doesn't she have a point?
What's sycophantic about trying to get someone over?
Well, I
you
think
could be getting people over for all kinds of reasons.
Well, I think her view is, and the view of some of our listeners, is if you're not sycophantic, if you don't treat these people almost like gods, they won't bother to talk to you.
No, you have to shout at them to get them across if they were not planning over. On 5 Live, about half an hour before, Sir Alex Ferguson, the former Manchester United manager, arrived and was heading into the party. He wasn't going to speak to any... Well, the American crews didn't want to speak to him because they didn't know who he was. But I shouted his name, Sir Alex Ferguson, Sir Alex Ferguson. He stopped, looked up, saw the BBC microphone and headed over. And we had 3 minutes of Sir Alex Ferguson telling us about his night at the Oscars. It's not sycophantic to shout someone's name. You are getting their attention in a busy scenario.
Some of our listeners do say, can these spur-of-the-moment interviews elicit anything meaningful? When eventually Bono did give an interview, what he said was, scarcely memorable. Some would say it was content-free.
What actually happened there was, after the Bono had walked by, I then retreated from the edge of the red carpet to sort of gain control of the situation again, to a certain extent. While we were there, Bono actually came back while we were live on Radio 4 because of my shouting. Now, because I'd moved back from the red carpet, he was looking for me, didn't see me. Then BBC Breakfast held up a sign and he went into BBC Breakfast. I did not get to ask the questions because by the time I went across, another interview had started, and I think there might have been even more complaints if I'd interrupted someone else's interview. The questions I would have asked him about were why Nelson Mandela, in the year of Nelson Mandela's death, a film about Nelson Mandela, had only got 1 Oscar nomination and it didn't win on the night. I'd have asked him for his views on 12 Years a Slave, winning Best Picture, the first film to tackle the subject of slavery to win Best Picture at the Oscars since 1939. So I think those would have been justifiable questions. If you put your mic under someone else's interview, you are a hostage to fortune.
Of course, I accept that, but the general point our listeners make is that very rarely do these personalities, celebrities, ever get asked any serious question. And the real suggestion is they have PR minders who won't let you ask anything interesting, and therefore you have to ask the anodyne or whatever, and we have to treat whatever they say as if, it's not almost handed down like the Ten Commandments. In other words, you can't help but be sycophantic. If you do the job, you do.
Before, no interviews that I did live on 5 Live from the Vanity Fair party did any PR speak to me and put any stipulations on it. I was free to ask whatever I wanted at that. You get absolutely fantastic access there, and that's why, as I say, I got Benedict Cumberbatch talking about the importance of 12 Years a Slave and his reaction to it winning, and Alfonso Cuarón, 2 of the most relevant people. If you were drawing up a dream list of people to speak to after the Oscars, they would have been there, and there were absolutely no stipulations put down by any publicist. Yes, sometimes in junket interviews and hotels there were, but at this event, there were absolutely none.
So, in the end, did you learn anything from this episode for the future, apart from perhaps not working mainly for 5 Live, not Radio 4?
I'm very committed to Radio 4. I do quite a lot of obituaries and reports on Radio 4 across it. Radio 4 does not tend to do live red carpet events. I think this is probably about the only time all year when anything would even fall within the Today programme time slot. And I really did. I mean, come on, within 2 cries of Bono, I was trying to take the listeners with them. I was acknowledging this was not a normal moment for Radio 4. After the shouting, I immediately said, that wasn't very I think I've brought shame on Radio 4. I was trying to put humour into it and take the listeners along, let them sample what it's like at the Vanity Fair party, and let them know that I knew it wasn't a very Radio 4 moment, and I hope people enjoyed it. I know it annoyed some people. I think it made a lot of people smile in the morning.
BBC Arts and Entertainment correspondent Colin Patterson, who very gamely gave up some of his holiday in Las Vegas to do that interview. Now, you don't have to be an award winner to get on feedback. You just have to get in touch about anything to do with BBC Radio. You can email feedback@bbc.co.uk or leave a phone message on 03 333 444 544. Standard landline charges apply, but some mobile networks might charge more. You can tweet BBC R4 Feedback or send me a letter to Feedback, PO Box 67234, London SE1P 4AX. All those details are on our website. Now, of course, we're not the only programme on the airways trawling for listeners' comments. Most regular programmes now have a dedicated email address, a Facebook account, or a Twitter feed, or sometimes all three. But what do they do with all these messages? Do they get read? And how often are they acted upon, either in terms of eliciting a reply or in influencing what goes on air? One Radio 4 programme which prides itself more than most in being open to listener interaction is Sunday Morning's Broadcasting House, and they invited us to scrutinise their inbox. How could I resist? Particularly as I wanted to find out if its presenter, Paddy O'Connell, was as cordial in real life as he sounds on air. So, early last Sunday, I dragged myself from my bed and stumbled into the BH office, where, of course, the production team had been hard at work since before dawn. What you can hear in the background is an editorial discussion on the BH programme taking place about 40 minutes before they go on air. The running order's fixed, and Eloise Twisk is the editor of the day. Paddy O'Connell, who we're going to talk to a little bit later, is in the studio recording some links. What we want to find out is, do they really pay any attention to the emails you send them? Does what the audience say really affect the content of the programme?
My name is Eloise Twisk, and I'm an assistant editor on Broadcasting House and PM.
Has the running order changed much since yesterday?
Well, we were going to do Ukraine, and we still are. But Obama's made a comment, William Hague's made comments, so we're going to put those clips in.
Now, we're particularly interested in the way in which listeners' emails do affect your programme, if they do, both in terms of suggesting items or commenting on them and suggesting ways perhaps you could develop them. Do they have any real impact? Is there anything in today's programme which has been suggested by a listener?
No, but we read the inbox with great interest while we're on air and while we're not on air. Yeah, we're very interested in reaction to the programme. Yeah, we love going to meet our listeners. That's the lifeblood of the programme. And we have our quiz. You know, you get the chance to win a spoon.
We have spoons, yes. This is a large wooden spoon. Is that your personal signature? Oh, no, you've just carved BH on the end of it, yes.
Well, I didn't do it myself.
But you will autograph it?
We don't autograph it. It's whittled.
This is a fairly basic spoon, I have to say. I mean, it's not. BBC expenses will not be broken by this.
No, I hasten to add it's wooden.
Yeah. What sort of stories generate the most interest?
I suppose it's quite trivial or silly things that get people going. I can't think of a good example. Paddy, can you think of a good example?
Well, I mean, I know that today I think Eloise has picked a topic that is going to make a lot of email action, which is this question of the English language. It's raised by Nigel Farage. He said there's a particular train where you can hardly hear English spoken. So we boarded that train, and then we're going to have a debate about it.
You're only half an hour now, so tension is rising. Well, it actually isn't. You're preternaturally calm. Is this the way it normally is?
Yes, it is, to be honest, because, you know, it's a very long run-up for BH. Our colleagues on the daily programmes, you know, they often have 2 or 3 hours to get going. Well, we've been here since Thursday doing the crossword. No, we haven't been doing that. But we've had more time. It's now just over 4 minutes before we go on air. We're sitting outside the studio still, where a producer is cutting an interview with John Simpson that's going to be put into the programme. So I think we'd better go inside the studio gallery, where we've been told we can stay as long as we don't say too much. BBC Radio 4, it's 9 o'clock. Good morning. This is Broadcasting House. I'm Paddy O'Connell with Neil Sleet, who'll be reading the news. The headlines. President Obama has... I think it's time for us to pop outside of the studio gallery and see if there are any emails coming in reaction to the programme. Well, during and following that discussion on the English language with Peter Hitchens and Gisela Stewart, there have been quite a few emails about that, including one that says there are parts of South Spain where you mainly hear English. These expats are separated from the local culture until they learn Spanish. It's a UK ghetto. Somebody says, as a regular commuter on the Charing Cross to Orpington line, I was horrified by Nigel Farage's comments and the implication contained in them. Maybe Nigel should try commuting more regularly. Doubtless there'll be some, and in the BBC way we must of course search them out, supportive of Nigel Farage. Can we find one? Here's an email of people critical about the BBC. How does the BBC always find the one vox pop voice who just happens to back up their own position on immigration?
Live now in the news, our quiz has been interfering with an item on the home front this week.
Just putting the shirt on is just, boy, a dream.
We had a lot to begin with in reaction to the Nigel Farage story about travel. Then, of course, when the quiz went, it went bananas. Now, after the papers, the emails have quietened down quite a lot.
But in a plantation home nearby, slavery's legacy is viewed very differently.
I am Tony Ward. We're at Lloyd.
It's now 8 minutes to 10, and they're into an item about the Oscars tonight and about 12 years a slave. And after that, what? There's this 2-minute item on the end of the programme. Well, what's that about?
Advance of tonight's Oscars. Now, we've kept something back for you from the last hour. Since 9, we've been auditing all contact to our programme. We've invited Roger Bolton of Feedback fame to see unedited all comments sent to our programme. Welcome, Roger Bolton.
Thank you very much. I feel like the Grand Inquisitor, actually.
Well, so, a listener has suggested, who heard about this, that it's like being in special measures when you come in. What have you seen by looking at all of the contacts from all of our listeners?
Well, you haven't particularly offended. We're not here because of that. Well, I think what's interesting is that, there are some people who say they like your programme, but the majority of them aren't concerned about your programme. It's about the content. And obviously the thing that they responded to, most of all, is, first of all, the Nigel Farage issue.
The producers were Peter Carlson and Ed Ram. The editor was Eloise Twisk. Please do join Kevin Connolly with the programme next Sunday. For now, thanks for listening and goodbye.
Well, Paddy, the programme's finished. Big sense of... is that, if you really key up like a dramatic performance, do you feel actually suddenly it's tired?
Well, I do feel that we had a lot to get through. I think listeners may have been a bit sort of tired with us today. We had lots of information to give and we were, getting through things. So I'm just hoping that we delivered the right information, but we also had variety.
It's interesting looking at the emails or whatever. There's a lot of really interesting information there. But I think one of the things that comes across to me, and it comes across also presenting feedback, is listeners just want to be heard.
Yes, what we find is that listeners will listen to our programme and others and will say, I work in this field, here's a paragraph or two about what I've learned. And you see this time and time and time again. And I think they want to know that the lights are on, that we're listening, because you can't have the BBC, just a bunch of old suits paying themselves lots of money, when the country wants to talk about all these issues. And people are battering the door down to tell us not what we're like or if the programme's any good, but about what the country's like. How do you deal with all this insight from people? How do you get to it?
One of the things that strikes me wandering around the BBC News Centre here and all the programmes which are in a way feeding off each other is if you don't have this connection with the audience, if they don't contact you, you're all going to be on the same agenda, doing the same stories, if you're not careful in the same way. That one of the ways of ensuring that programmes are different is making sure they listen to the audience and respond to it.
We try to, but the Radio 4 audience does not want it to be, tell us what you think. What do you think of this? Email us on the banana prices. Tell us about, politics. They don't want it to be that radio station, but they do want it to be interacting with the real world.
OK, well, thanks very much. What time were you up this morning, by the way?
Well, I get up at about 5:30. So, this is nothing compared to what our colleagues on the Today programme do. But I'm feeling almost awake now. And it's been really, thank you for coming in. And it's nice not to be in trouble with you for a change.
The exception that proves the rule, Paddy. Our thanks to Mr. O'Connell and the BH team. And yes, Paddy is as avuncular as he sounds, but not as old. Now, as you all know far too well, Radio 4 is no stranger to technical glitches. A few moments, unexplained silence, is an occupational hazard for any live broadcaster, but it's not often an entire programme simply disappears. That's what happened to Tuesday's Yesterday in Parliament, much to the surprise and frustration of this listener.
Hello, I'm Liam Carr, and I'm the parliamentary candidate for the Labour Party for Hexham. Every day on my way to work, I try and time my journey in order to tune into Yesterday in Parliament. The sports report will stop, then the presenter will say, and now for Radio 4 Longwave listeners, it's time for Yesterday in Parliament. But on Tuesday, the sport went off, and then there was silence for about a minute.
Gender, in your opinion?
I think if you look in the women's game,
So I waited. And eventually the sport came back on, and I'd realised then that the FM was broadcasting into the long wave frequency, and there would be no Yesterday in Parliament for me on Tuesday.
For you, Exeter 4:30, number 3, Milor de Laborie, and Newcastle 4.
Which I was really quite put out about, because I rely on Yesterday in Parliament for an update every morning on my way to work. Even for people who aren't directly involved in politics, it really allows people to see what goes on in our democracy. So I was just wondering what exactly happened.
So were we. Radio 4 told us.
It's always nice to hear from people like Liam about how valued our broadcasts are to them. There was a technical issue which meant that Yesterday in Parliament was not broadcast on longwave as scheduled. We've identified the problem and do not expect it to recur. An on-air apology was made and listeners were directed to the Radio 4 website where they can listen to Today in Parliament.
6 minutes to 9. Just a quick apology. If you are listening on longwave and you had hoped not to be listening to us but to be hearing what happened yesterday in Parliament, sorry, bit of a technical failure at this end. And if you do want to hear, you can go to our website where apparently you can get a link to it.
In fact, unbeknownst to Sarah Montague and others, I dare say, Yesterday in Parliament is never available to listen to again. Its website simply consists of page after page of pretty pictures of Westminster overlaid either with the message, "This episode will be available soon," or "Not currently available." So Tuesday's Yesterday in Parliament, lovingly crafted though it was by Susan Hume, will never be heard by anyone outside of BBC Westminster. Peter Knowles is her boss and the editor of BBC Parliamentary Programmes.
The programme is played out on an automatic playout, and that's automation's a brilliant thing. It saves the BBC an awful lot of money and it's an essential part of our operations. But it depends on people and computers being in perfect harmony all of the time, and I'm afraid we don't always achieve that perfection.
It wasn't a case of you failing to complete the programme on time or anything like that?
No, the programme was there, and it's, I share the pain of that member of the audience. People love these programmes. We love making them. It's a desperate shame when something goes wrong like that.
The BBC ultimately failed to deliver this parliamentary programme. Did it break an agreement in doing so?
Well, the BBC's agreement, which is attached to the Charter, the Royal Charter, is to produce a daily account of proceedings in Parliament. Well, we do that over and again. We do it through Today in Parliament. There was no transmission problem with Today in Parliament this week. We do it normally through Yesterday in Parliament. We do it through a half-hour programme on the television channel, BBC Parliament. Yesterday in Parliament has to be seen in that context of there are the radio programmes, a 24/7 TV channel, and a really impressive website, Democracy Live.
Can you take us through how you actually make them? Because I've always been impressed about how you get it cut down to size in the right time without offending politicians and so on. What's the process during the day? Are you editing throughout the day?
It happens in stages, but it starts with the meeting I've just come from, which is half an hour before the Commons sits, and we're looking at for the agenda of the day. And at that point, then there are flashes that appear which tell us what urgent questions on statements are being made, and most days nowadays there are such things, and so at that point we've got a sense of the shape of the agenda, and we're looking across both houses. The Commons has a second chamber, it's called Westminster Hall because it sits just off Westminster Hall, and then there are an enormous number of committees, so we're trying to sift our way through that.
Are you subject to a lot of pressure? I mean, do politicians come up to you and say, particularly representing their parties, and say, "Peter, we think you're leaning a little too much towards the opposition here. You're not. You missed this out. It's terribly important." Do they try and do that to you?
No, I actually can't think of a single instance of that. What you do get is disappointment if their main theme, the thing that they care passionately about, isn't mentioned or isn't mentioned
because they're all trying to set the agenda, aren't they? I mean, the whole game is basically to set the agenda and make people follow it if you can. And how about the more subtle approaches of committee chairmen who come to you and say, "Peter, you missed this extraordinarily important meeting we had the last time. Now we've got this one coming. I'm sure you'll want to feature this. Won't you, Peter?" I mean, do you ever get a bit of a subtler approach by those?
Yes.
They're trying to make their name after all as well.
They do, because the broadcasters choose which committees are filmed, and which committees are filmed tends to determine which ones get both watched and listened to. So there is that interest in what we do.
And do you think chairmen like, well, let me pluck a name out of nowhere, Margaret Hodge deliberately crafts a soundbite to ensure that she will get on your programme?
She's absolutely not on her own. There are many chairs and many members of committees who actually have come to understand what a soundbite sounds like.
That's a yes there. Good. Yeah, it's rather strange that Yesterday in Parliament isn't available for listen again.
And on the website, there's just a page after page of very attractive photographs of Westminster, but telling people they can't listen to the programme. Why can't you?
It's not yet. The long wave and digital stream is not yet available via iPlayer Radio. I dearly love it to be, but it's not yet there. And there are complicated technical reasons behind that. I do hope it will be there. But actually, the fact that we sort of feel that gap now does actually draw attention to just how brilliant iPlayer has been and how dependent we've become on it.
And have you had any official inquiry about what happened to the missing programme, and a suggestion perhaps you might be in breach of contract for not delivering it or anything like that?
No. The people I work with in Parliament, actually, they're responsible for delivering an awful lot of technical infrastructure, both audio and visual also, and they know that 100% perfection is pretty hard to get to.
The editor of BBC Parliamentary Programmes, Peter Knowles. Now, before we go, time for a trip into the archive vaults. Last week's discussion about Radio 4's version of The Exorcist and radio horror in general prompted listener John Carter to get in touch.
Immediately I thought of a wonderful man called Valentine Dial, who had the most amazing deep voice and who hosted a program called Appointment with Fear.
Appointment with Fear.
It was on, I think, from about 1943 or 4 or something like that through to the mid-50s. But it was delivered in this unbelievably unique way, as I say, with the most amazing, dark, deep voice. That alone was a bit scary.
This is your storyteller, the man in black.
I really would like to hear that marvellous voice again if it were possible. I'm sure there's something in the archives. And I did wonder if one heard these today, whether they'd be as frightening now as they seemed to be all those years ago.
And while we take you into a strange dungeon, to be shadowed by an even stranger menace, we trust we shall keep our promise to bring you an appointment with fear.
Oh, crumbs, yes, absolutely tremendous. That brings back so many memories, it really does. Probably a little more stilted and actory than I remember, but, oh yes, very creepy, very spooky.
I tottered on the edge of the pit. Ah!
And that is the end of the story and the deep shuddered.
Thank you, Valentine Dial. And thank you, John Carter, listener and former presenter. Goodbye. This is a download from the BBC. To find out more and for our terms of use, please go to bbc.co.uk. Hello. Wait a minute. Who's that over there?
Bono, you're live in the Today programme. Bono!
Alan Partridge lives. The perils of broadcasting live from the red carpet.
It sounded to me as if he was a teenager chasing his latest idol.
Bono! Oh,
he's gone, is he?
Alan, otherwise known as Colin Patterson, gives us the lowdown on his Partridge moment.
Come on, within 2 cries of Bono, I was trying to take the listeners with them. I was acknowledging this was not a normal moment for Radio 4.
You could say that again. Also, we squeeze inside the Broadcasting House inbox and do our own
Pleased to Bono to come and talk live on the radio to John Humphreys.
Bono, you're live in the Today programme. Come over and speak to John Humphreys.
No, you're not speaking to John.
That's Jim Naughty, sorry.
Hello, my name is Philip Manvell. I'm a regular listener to Radio 4, and particularly the Today programme. It sounded to me as if he was a teenager chasing his latest idol.
Bono! Oh,
he's gone, is he?
I'm feeling this is undignified for Radio 4.
Former guest editor of this programme, you know. Anyway, Colin...
And then a short while later, oh, there's Bono again. It's BBC, and he got Bono there.
I think we've got Bono coming back.
Oh, is he? Is he coming?
He is coming over.
What Bono had to say didn't seem at all of any interest. It was bland, very anodyne, and not the sort of thing that we would expect on the Today programme.
We had a great time. We're here. We're tourists. You know what I mean? It's Hollywood. It's Hollyweird. It's great fun.
Hello, my name's Steve Collins. I'm from Chichester. Now, I'm not particularly interested in what Bono has to say at the best of times, but when Mr. Patterson did finally speak to the Irish singer, it wasn't really worth listening to.
I don't want to talk about what Nelson Mandela meant to me, or you'd be here all night, all morning, and the next day. It's great to sing a song for him.
I don't blame Bono for this. Just I don't think that the BBC should display such creepiness towards him. It was like everything he says must be so profound, but it really was nonsensical as far as I was concerned.
The Oscars. I almost feel I brought shame in the Today programme.
You haven't no. Your rugby tackle on Bono was much appreciated.
You're okay about it.
An audit of emails sent to Barry O'Connell and his programme team.
People are battering the door down to tell us not what we're like or if the programme's any good, but about what the country's like.
And we try to unravel another mystery. Why did Tuesday's edition of Yesterday in Parliament go missing? But first, the annual orgy of hyperbolic sycophancy that is the Oscars. Every year, TV viewers are treated to a galaxy of Hollywood stars posing and pouting on the red carpet in an attempt to make it onto the front pages and into the top tweets. And we love it, particularly when the Brits are in conquering mood.
12 Years a Slave, Brad Pitt, Lily Gardner, Jeremy Clarkson.
The scheduling is a bit of a problem, though, since by the time the awards are finally handed out in the Hollywood night, most of us are fast asleep. So perhaps it's understandable that Radio 4's flagship Today programme wanted to wake us up on Monday morning with the results, delivered live from one of the most prestigious post-Oscar parties. But many of our listeners were not impressed by the coverage, and they were certainly not pro bono.
My name is Charlie Stevenson. I'm from East Sussex. While there was nothing wrong with having an item in the programme about the Oscars, especially since this year held significant British interest, perhaps it wasn't a good idea having a live link to the red carpet at a post-event party with entertainment reporter Colin Patterson.
I'm at the red carpet at the Vanity Fair party at the moment, and Bono is walking past.
Colin was clearly caught up in the thrill of the moment, and we were then subject to the unedifying sound of Colin's desperately shouted